So tonight I am skinning and prepping all of these birds. I'm going to be focusing on this particular starling. We're going to do it in a standing pose because I need a summer starling standing pose to incorporate into a piece I'm doing. This is the mount that we'll be adding it to. I've already got one starling in summer plumage flying. Got some nice flowers here. And although this base is a little on the small side, I think I can fit one more bird down here, that other summer starling. And just to show, this is a starling in winter plumage. You can tell there's a lot more white, more of the white speckles. The beak is practically gray, the feet are practically brown in comparison to this one. So I just didn't want to incorporate them in the same piece because, yeah, it wouldn't really be accurate, I suppose. Well, the reason I want to do a tutorial on a standing bird is because, in my experience, in my opinion, I think a flying bird is actually easier to do. The anatomy of the flying wings are a little bit easier to understand, to picture, to recreate. Standing birds, getting the wings to tuck and actually look smooth, getting your bird balanced out, I think that's actually a little more difficult than doing a flying bird. So step one, really, before you even start working on the bird, a lot of people want to skip by this and just look at a handful of photos and call it good, but reference is so important. Because what we're going to do here is we're going to take this bird apart completely, turn it inside out, recreate most of its anatomy, and piece it back together in a way that looks alive and natural, which is actually really difficult. And so it takes a lot of knowledge of the anatomy. You have to become a little bit of a scientist here and really just study the anatomy. And your carcass here, just bending and rotating things and figuring out, how does the wing set? How does it set? Where do the feathers lie when it's in this position? Stuff like that. Video reference and live reference of live birds. So just, what's the range of motion of the wings? How do the wings set? Where do they connect? The legs, the placement of everything. The feather groups. It's all feather groups. That's how you have to look at it. You've got your scapular feathers here, which lie just over the wings. You've got the primary feathers here to here, the secondary feathers here to here, secondary coverts, primary coverts, these little thumb feathers, I forget what they're called. And you've got this whole section on the back. You've got these side pocket feathers, which wrap over the wing like so. The belly feathers, breast feathers. The neck itself on these birds has so many different little feather groups in here. And it's easier to see when we skin the bird. You'll see the feather quills on the inside of the skin. You'll be able to see the feather groups from that perspective. You've got the tail coverts, the tail itself, the little feathers that go under the tail, So just get familiar, get really familiar. And it is something that takes practice. This is another detail, the flight webs. So on the wings here you have the bone, which goes right here, and it connects. And between, there's sort of this area of skin here, which connects at the shoulder and goes up like this. And it's just kind of this loose skin. And when you're mounting the bird, you pull and pin this flight web in place. So yeah, if you were thinking that this was gonna be like a quick and easy kind of video, there's not really. You can do taxidermy quick and easy, but it's gonna look like crap. So I just like to go more into depth with things. Quick overview of some tools. Scalpels. Get a couple different sizes and figure out what works best for you. get a sharps container to put your scalpel blades in, your used ones, and label it sharps, because, yeah, just don't put those in the trash. Couple of shears, small sharp scissors. I got a bigger pair, which I won't be using for this bird, obviously. And then a smaller pair. I get these from Matuska Taxidermy Supply, and they're like the best. I used like small kids scissors for a while, but these are honestly the best. I love them so much. Small wire cutters for cutting bone and for grabbing flesh. This little thing I also got from Matuska. It's just like little wires on the end of a stick. And got some tweezers and little tiny, I think they're called cuticle scissors. You can find them at a beauty store, or taxidermy supply companies have really small scissors too. And so we're going to make an incision from the top of the breast down to the belly. That's what you do on most birds. And we just start by separating the feathers. You can use a wet toothbrush to kind of separate them, or just your fingers. This bird was already wet, and so it's actually really easy to separate these. Shouldn't have any feathers falling out. So we're going to make it just from the breastbone, just kind of to one side of it is how I like to make it. You don't have to press too hard. Be careful when you're cutting down the belly, because you might poke into the stomach. Sometimes it's inevitable, but it's kind of gross when you have the stomach poking out. Ideally, you want it to stay together. And you can kind of see where the skin is, and you're just going to kind of pinch it and lift it up. Gently peel it away. And it is sometimes the consistency of tissue paper, and it just wants to rip really easily. So use a very gentle hand, just pulling it away. Trying not to cut into the stomach. Just kind of. And you're just you're cutting that little white flesh that's in between the meat and the skin. You're just kind of cutting away there, and just, you don't have to put that much pressure on it. Minimize the amount of pressure that you put on it, or it will rip, it will poke holes, it will not be good. Let's start on the other side here. You can wear gloves if you want to. If I'm working on like a really gross bird, then I do. But I mean, honestly, I really, especially with these delicate birds, I like to actually be able to really feel what I'm doing. Really know what I'm doing, so I don't poke holes and such. Alright, so we've pulled it away and down quite a little bit. I like to get the back end skinned first and then move up to the top. So we're going to get the legs and the tail out of the way. So now you can see this little knee joint starting to pop through on the leg. You're just going to kind of gently push it up, try to expose it. Gently peel it away with your fingers. And skinning is where you really want to pay attention to the anatomy and like visualize. Just take some time to visualize how everything works. Now, we're not going to go all the way up the leg. We're going to cut it right at this knee joint. Sometimes you can cut it straight through. Sometimes it's stubborn and you need to cut the bone. I think I might be able to. Oh, I just cut it the wrong spot. I think it's up here. There we go. Just cut right through the cartilage. There we go. But be careful, be wary of the skin on the other side once you cut through it. So there, we've cut through that joint. there's the skin. Now, the skin on the lower back of the bird, of any bird, is actually really tight and really thin and easy to cut for some reason. Okay, so now we're going to do the other leg. Nice. Make sure it's exposed quite a bit before you try and cut through it. Little knee. You know, feel. It's all about feeling, at least for me. There we go. Cut right through it. And sometimes you might use those little wire cutters to cut through the legs, but you know, when you become familiar with it, you know where to cut so that it will cut straight through. Okay, so now we're gonna disconnect the sort of tailbone. Here's the butthole, and I kind of try and peel this down. I cut right through it until you're hitting that tailbone, kind of. I just like to use my wire cutters and feel where that tailbone is and just cut through the tailbone and nothing else. Try not to cut the skin around it. This lower back area, the skin is really tight, so be careful. Take your time. Don't worry about all that fat on the skin. We'll get that cleaned off later. Let's see how tight it is on that lower back. So now we've disconnected the tail and the two legs. Be careful as you're approaching the back of like the wings. So that's what it's looking like. So now when we are going to do the wings, we come up here, work your way up to the neck area a little bit. Now, feel that joint. Feel where that wing bone joint is. And once you get familiar enough, you know, with how it connects, the wing, that ball joint there, you can just cut straight through and know where to sever it. There. There's the bone. There's where it was connected. Carefully cutting the flesh around it. I keep saying carefully. The whole thing is careful. Every little step you must do carefully. Alright. So now we're going to do the other wing. Ew. Slimy guts. Not good. Okay. Feel where that ball joint connects. Right about here. And cut through. A little off that time. Sometimes it's cut straight through and I'm like, oh wow, I did it in just one swift straight motion. But then other times it takes some figuring out. So that's our progress. Everything is skinned. We just have to get the neck out. Now, skinning the head and neck. So with larger birds and with ducks and such, you make a little incision around the beak where those feathers meet the beak or the bill. But on small birds like this, I like to do an inverted head where you keep the skull attached. I use, for like ducks and other birds, I use artificial heads. They're a hyper-realistic cast of a head, usually plastic, of a bird's head, and you paint them. You paint the bill to look realistic, and then you mount the skin over it and super glue the edges here. But on smaller birds and some others, I like to use the original skull. We're going to preserve the skull and keep it attached. But first is the neck. And you call this an inverted head, is what you call it. Be sure you're cutting the connective tissue, not the skin. There's a lot of fat on their necks. And we will be using the neck in this mount as well. You can use like foam neck material or cotton on wire or whatever. I like to actually preserve the real neck, so I'll show you about that too. Now, as you're getting to the base of the skull, just kind of carefully work it over. Hold the beak and like do like that. Sorry, it's hard for me to watch what I'm doing and also try and watch the camera and make sure I'm in shot. The first thing you're going to cut through is the ear. The little ears. And when you're cutting the ear holes and the eye holes, cut as close to the skull as you can. You want to save as much skin as you can. I can feel it. It's just this little nub. I'm gonna cut it. Oh, that was the wrong spot. It's down here. There. That's the ear for you. Very careful on the jaw. Now we're cutting up to the eye. Cut down a little bit. Actually, I'm going to do the ear on the other side. Let's see if I can get it right this time, huh? There we go. I think that's good. There. That one was better. Okay, now I'm going to do the eye on this side. And grab it and just lift it up. Pinch and lift it up. And cut down and close to the skull. It's okay if you cut into the eyeball itself. It's better than making a hole in that fragile eyelid. The eyelid skin is probably the thinnest area. If the eyeball's in the way, just rip it out. Just rip out that little eyeball. You can see it there. And we'll save that for later. There. Now we got it out. One piece. Get some of this flesh out of here. Let's see if I can do it really smoothly for demonstration. Oh, I'm cutting into the eyeball. Yeah, and there's black juice that goes everywhere when you cut into the eyeball. That's fun. Yuck, yuck. There. That's a little better. So now you can see Okay. Now, what we're going to do is cut it off right here. Oops. Get your trachea. I'm going to save these eyes for later, for when we need to measure the eyes. Where's that other one? Here we go. And we need to clean out the brain cavity. So, actually first, we'll keep it there. Okay. You're going to see one little tiny hole that leads into the brain cavity. You're just going to cut it. Because we need a slightly bigger hole than that in order to access the brain cavity and clean it. So, cut away some of the meat, make kind of a bigger hole in there. And this is where I like to use this little thing and scrape out the brains. Fun stuff. It's still not a big enough hole. Almost like to cut out a perfect little square in there. There, now more of the brains coming out. Oh. If you have like a little curved piece of wire to get in there and sort of scrape it out like a spoon, that works too. I'm going to cut out the tongue as well. This is helpful for getting those chunks of meat off, I think. You can kind of trim the edges of the jaw. And just keep picking away at it. You want it to be almost down to just the bone, leaving only a little bit of tissue and like cartilage on here. And then we'll move on to fleshing our skin. And we're going to save this carcass and freeze it. We're going to save it for when we're making our little foam body. You can make bodies out of foam or wood. We're going to save our eyes. Bird eyes are measured in millimeters. This, I want to say, looks like a 7mm eye.